A very good morning to all of you. It is my pleasure to welcome the distinguished gathering here for the release of the working paper on integrating electricity priorities into healthcare and education in India, a review of national and subnational policies. I am Lanvin Conceso from the WRI India Energy team and one of the co-authors of the paper, and I would be taking you through the agenda for the day. At the outset, I would like to inform that today's session will be recorded and the videos will be uploaded on our website and social media platforms. I would also request everyone to keep the phones on silent. In case our new guests have not signed the contact form outside, please do sign it whenever you get the time. In case the information gets too heavy, there is tea, coffee, and refreshments kept at the back. So firstly, I would like to invite our distinguished guests, Dr. O.P. Agarwal, Mr. Rakesh Ranjan, and Dr. Arun Panda to join us on the stage. I hope today's occasion provides an opportunity for everyone to have meaningful interactions with each other. For any feedback, do write to us at indiaenergyteam@wri.org. Firstly, I would like to invite Mr. Bharat Jairaj to give the welcome address. Bharat is the Executive Director of the Energy Program at WRI India. The program seeks to inform and catalyze India's transition to clean energy through increased use of renewable energy and energy efficiency, while also ensuring reliable and affordable access to energy for all. He's also a senior associate with WRI's Equity Center and co-leads the global energy governance practice.
Welcome to our distinguished guests, to all of you. For a few years now, we've been working on an initiative called what we call E4D, which is Energy for Development. In this initiative, we look at how access to sustainable, to affordable, to reliable energy can lead to socio-economic developmental outcomes, particularly in the remote and rural parts of the country, including the aspirational districts. And we have the director of the TADP program here today, which is very important to sort of connect what we are trying to do at the national level. Now, several developmental outcomes have always assumed that electricity is available. Wherever you go, any sector you look at, there is an assumption made that electricity is available and that the outcomes are therefore dependent on the availability and reliability of electricity. So when we look at India today, which is, thanks to Saubhagya scheme, we've achieved near 100% household electrification. But then if you look at human development indicators, you look at socioeconomic indicators, in many of these districts, you will see that despite the 100% household electrification, there are still, as far as other aspects are concerned, it's still the same, or more or less the same. The improvements we are seeing in districts isn't that much. And so that's actually what led us to this initiative, where we said, how do we connect? What is it going to take to see more improvement in socio-economic development outcomes? Now, I remember a few years ago, we were in a particular state, we were in the secretariat, we went to meet the health secretary. And we started talking to him about how clean energy can help achieve health outcomes, health sector outcomes. And he said, stop, you talking about energy? He says, you come to the wrong room. Go down the corridor, turn left, third room on the right, that is energy. Go to them and talk to them, because we don't have anything to do with energy. And I said, no, it's not true, because several healthcare outcomes assume, like I said, the availability of energy. Whether it is, and we've seen it now with the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm not even talking about ventilators and the capability of ICUs and so on, just the ability to store vaccines assumes a certain level of reliable energy. Storing blood, running operating theaters, and just a whole range of facilities and medical services, healthcare services, have always assumed that energy is available. Some of this is 24/7, some of it is not necessarily 24/7, but the role that energy plays in the healthcare sector is often underestimated. And then I remember saying, therefore, energy departments must be more concerned about, healthcare departments must be more concerned about energy decisions. And it's not a different story if you think about education. You think about broadly rural development, you look at livelihoods, you look at agriculture and extensions and so on, that the role of energy needs to be better understood, planned for, and designed such that the sectoral outcomes can actually happen. And that's really why we designed and developed this program or this initiative called the Energy for Development Initiative. And crucial in this is to go beyond pilots. Now, we all know there are tons and tons of pilots. I mean, India is, as often said, to be a place where we have done many, many pilots. The challenge always has been how do we scale these solutions? And that's really where the role of policy comes. And I'm very glad that the working paper that we are releasing today focuses on this particular aspect of policies and the role policies and the integration of policies can play in scaling up solutions. And the paper, what it does, and my colleague will talk in more detail about it, but it looks at a range of national and state policies with a view to understand how have they addressed this integration, this convergence, and the synergies between the energy sector and the socioeconomic development sectors. Now, one more point. Last week, the Honorable Health Minister, the Government of India, publicly lauded the initiatives of NGOs during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is an important point because we are not just talking about, given the scale and size of India's development needs, we are going to need to see convergence not just at policy level, but also between public and private and charitable organizations, a sort of lot more convergence in terms of design and approach, because that's what we are going to, how we are going to be able to achieve scale in solutions so that no one is left behind. So with that sort of introduction, let me welcome all of you again. I also want to recognize that this is not easy times, and I know many of you may have had butterflies in your stomach deciding whether to come to this meeting or not. But thank you for coming here. And I particularly want to thank our partners in government, but also outside government, as well as our donors, without whom a lot of this work could not have taken place. So with that, thank you and welcome again. Lanvin, back to you.
Thank you so much, Bharat. And as you all know, this is actually a hybrid event, and we have several guests joining us today virtually as well. So I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of them. So now next, it's now my pleasure to invite Dr. O.B. Agarwal to formally release the paper along with Dr. Arun Panda and hand over the paper to Mr. Rakesh Ranjan. As you all know, Dr. Agarwal is the CEO of WRI India. He has served as a member of the Indian Administrative Service from 1979 to 2007, during which he held several positions with the national government and the state government of Assam. At WRI India, he leads the organization's ongoing efforts to strengthen its work around cities, energy, climate, landscape restoration, water, and government engagement. With that, I'd also like to invite the co-authors on stage along with Bharat to join us. And we also have two of our authors joining us virtually today, so if there's possibility of showing them on screen, that would be great as well. Dr. Agarwal, would you like to say a few words?
Thanks. Well, good morning, everyone. I want to say a few things in my own crude way. Bharat said it very nicely. He spoke a lot about the importance of quality electricity for the healthcare system. But let me say this expand this a little bit and say it in my own crude way. Some 40 years ago, when I was a young subdivisional officer and a district collector, one of the ways in which we used to decide where to locate specific facilities in a whole district was on the basis of which MLA made the loudest noise and who shouted the most. We had no scientific basis for deciding where we do what, other than these kinds of things. Today, what I see with this energy access explorer that we have launched and this paper that we have produced on where are the gaps in policy, and this whole set of efforts is really offering a tool that allows people like me 40 years ago and people who are in that position today to be able to decide on a more scientific basis where do we locate various utilities. Electricity is extremely important for health, absolutely right, because you need 24/7 electricity for that. You can't have DG sets sort of stepping in. But it's also important for so many other things. It's important for education. It's important for local industrial activities. A lot of food processing units which are located near farms, all of them suffer because electricity is not there on a more reliable basis. And I think what this enables us to do is to identify where the gaps are, where the opportunities are in a more scientific way, and invest in those kinds of locations. That's the value that I see in this tool, and I would really like to congratulate my team for doing this. I think it's a phenomenal job, and I think the Niti Aayog, particularly the unit or the team led by Mr. Rakesh Ranjan in his charge, will find this very useful, because what I find particularly interesting about his charge is it's not sectorially divided. It's an area. The mandate is how do you develop this area as a whole. In government, when we are often sectorally divided, we don't look at what is the impact of action in one sector on the other. Here what he's doing is looking at the impact in a whole area, makes it much easier for him to bring these tools into play for looking at different things across the board. So again, congratulations to my team. Great job. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Agarwal. I would now like to call upon Ms. Namrata Ginoya to present the highlights of the paper. Namrata is the lead author of this paper. She's the program manager for energy and resilience at WRI India. She's an experienced climate resilience expert and policy researcher who supports the team in mainstreaming climate resilience in energy access and development policy and projects. Her work includes strategic partnership building, project coordination, and knowledge management. So over to you, Namrata.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'll start us off very quickly. So I'll briefly provide a quick overview of our work. We work on integrating energy in development sectors, such as health, education, and livelihoods. It's in climate vulnerable regions, we focus on building resilient energy systems and building adaptive capacity via reliable energy access. Our governance work focuses on accessing better data, integrating program design, and responsible clean energy transition. About the paper, this is specifically part of our Energy for Development initiative, which focuses on accessing better data, identifying poorly served regions, right-sizing electricity supply, designing sustainable financing instruments, and mainstreaming evidence basically to achieve better outcomes. This paper focuses on policy review at a national level and states such as Rajasthan, Assam, and Jharkhand. The challenge basically, although India is close to achieving electricity access for all, its emphasis is on coverage rather than reliability. So in addition, electrification policies also focus on household electrification, with kind of little or no emphasis on electrification of institutions, mainly schools and clinics. So although household electrification has soared over the last couple of decades, it has not really improved situation in terms of health and education services in the 3 states. If we look at the SDGs, they recognize that strategies to alleviate poverty and inequality must align with actions to enhance healthcare, education, and socioeconomic development. The recent report that was on status of electricity access, which examined the role of energy in achieving SDGs, observed that there are interconnectedness with about 125 of the 169 SDG targets. For the multidimensional poverty index, when we look at poverty, it involves a lot of multiple deprivations. So with MPI, it comprises of like 10 indicators in health, education, and living standards to identify who is poor and in what way. So people are considered poor if they are deprived in 1/3 of the weighted indicators. So if we look at health and education indicators, they form about 2/3 of these indicators. Now a very brief view of the stats that we have. It's also in the paper. But as you can see here, access to electricity is still an issue in schools and health centers, which are important for socioeconomic development. But, and here we don't even have the statistics for reliability of this electricity in the institutions. What we have is just plain access indicators. So if we start off with health, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare focuses on reducing maternal mortality, infant mortality rates by targeting 24/7 access to electricity, which focuses on childbirth, pediatric care, timely vaccinations as well. So these services depend mostly on electricity, and we need electricity to sterilize medical equipment and treat medical waste, improve patient access, reduce absenteeism also with staff, and make working conditions better. So there are a lot of linkages between access to electricity and how health centers function as well. If we look at schools, electricity has, it can improve access to lighting, cooling, access to wash, digital resources, all of which affect your school attendance as well. Our own economic survey last year shows that states with, especially the high school electrification rates, which have gone up, has also seen literacy rates go up as well. So in conjunction with water, sanitation, and hygiene, which is WASH, access to electricity also creates a comfortable environment, both for students as well as teachers. One of the focus, as the title mentions, is integrated policymaking. So fundamentally, effective policy needs to include clarity of goals. It has to be open and evidence-based policy design. It also needs to consider, responsible engagement practices. There have to be accountable mechanisms that provide feedback and evaluation. So governments are required to work towards development goals, and through basically such effective policy design. However, as we all know, the process is not linear, it's very complicated. So there are concepts such as superimposition and mainstreaming, which seek to address all of these challenges, and they support integrated policy design. Such processes are also critical to ensure flexibility and adaptability to changing circumstances as well. Just to give an example, we have this scheme called Integrated Child Development Scheme. It is an example of how poor coordination and integration of resources kind of ended up derailing a very well-intended and designed policy. So one of the main reasons why it sort of was affected adversely was diversion of funds. There was suboptimal coverage, and varying service provisions there was lack of monitoring. All of these things, coordination meant that its main aim, which was to reduce malnutrition, it fell short of it. So it was a very well-intended scheme, but all of these issues, which are not integrated, then affected its implementation. So for this paper, we've used the analytical framework from planning to action. It's basically talks about levers of effective policy implementation, which are critical to integrating non-traditional dimensions. So in this case, they worked on climate integration. Here we are talking about reliable electricity access, especially in the development objectives, which are used to understand the broad categories of policy design, and also what is required to make them integrative. So if you look at the levers, it's policy frameworks, which are crucial in demonstrating a formalized intent regarding the objectives. There's coordination mechanisms, which are necessary to operationalize interdepartmental and transdisciplinary requirements, financial processes that support the vision of these frameworks, and also the coordination mechanisms. And finally, information and tools which help you enhance the cross-sectoral capacity and evidence to inform this kind of policy making. So also after the review analysis we ended up conducting semi-structured stakeholder consultations, mainly to solicit comments on policy implementation and corroborate our findings and give stakeholders the opportunity to offer recommendations, which we also included here. As we see here, the data that we analyzed included all sorts of documents which are titled as policies, schemes, programs, plans, guidelines, etc. And the focus sectors were healthcare, education, electricity, social development, revenue, and planning sectors across the country, as well as subnational policies. About half of the policies that we identified were in healthcare, and a third were in education. So if we look at the linkages between electricity and development outcomes, they are very explicit only in limited instances. In most cases, there is an afterthought of electricity, or it's completely absent. Policies, for us, in this case, after the review, we grouped them into 3 categories. Indirect, the policy needs electricity to be implemented, but there's no mention of it. Basic category, where the policy acknowledges the role of electricity, and integrated, where the policy reveals a bit more nuanced understanding of relationship between electricity and public service delivery, and integrates the electricity use in, with the user's demand. So there's an outcome-oriented design of policy over there. Of the 127 policies that we reviewed, 50 fell into the indirect category, 59 fell into the most basic category, and only 11 fell into what we are calling as integrative. So most of the integrative policies are national, obvious, but there were a couple of interesting policies from Jharkhand and Rajasthan, which were integrative as well. So discuss a few policies that we've mentioned. There's obviously 127 of them that we've reviewed. So I'll talk about a couple of them to showcase how we've sort of analyzed them as well. Many programs in health sector focus on improvement of infrastructure. So infrastructure then talks about building new facilities such as health centers, even the new health and wellness centers, and upgrading the existing ones. Purchasing equipment is one of them. There's improving diagnostic services, monitoring services. But if you look at this, this is all a list of infrastructure requirement, and none of these improvements specifically mention access to reliable electricity, or even mention electricity charges, an additional dimension that we need to reflect on while planning and budgeting, mainly to ensure that there's uninterrupted supply. Another example is the immunization program, that it basically needs refrigeration and cold chain infrastructure to function, but that program documentation does not mention electricity. If you look at Assam, The health center uses a PPP model to fund charitable hospitals, which provide free, low-cost health services. The funding is generally used to upgrade infrastructure again, but upgrading infrastructure, what does it exactly include? Apart from procuring equipment is not mentioned. So it's again unclear whether the fund can be used to procure an electricity connection or as operational charges also. So it's not mentioned, so we are unsure about it. If we look at the National Digital Health Mission, which is also part of the National Health Policy, again, the aim here is to digitize all healthcare. But the blueprint, which is out right now, it's a 5-year action plan, does not mention electricity at all. Now, if you want to digitize entire healthcare, the first thing that you will require is electricity. Most of these health centers lack the reliable electricity access and computers as well. And so they are unable to digitize the records that they have right now. There's also this discussion that we had with stakeholders, which mentioned that many patients that come to such healthcare centers are illiterate or cannot comprehend, informed consent. So all this digitization portals, online stuff that is becoming mandatory may end up, affecting, or patients may end up losing access to health service because they are not able to, digitize their records or put them information out there. And basically, what we are trying to say here is that that kind of services then there's more inequity in the society if some people are not able to access certain services. On the education side, the most important policy is obviously the Right to Education Act. And all of the state level policies are based on it. Its main focus is basic infrastructure requirements in the school. They mandate that the schools should have water and sanitation facilities. But again, they don't mention electricity. And some of the water and sanitation facilities need to be powered by electricity. SSA program, which mentions that good infrastructure is needed, it's one of the objectives. It doesn't discuss what constitutes as infrastructure, which would include electricity as well. Digital literacy programs, again, similar to what health is facing. They talk about access to phones, giving out computers, training folks to use these devices, but no discussion about electricity. Development programs, if we look at it from the multi-sector point of view, a lot of them focus on infrastructure such as building schools, sanitation, housing, roads. Some of them even mention 24/7 drinking water supply. Again, no mention of how these services would be powered. There was also an assessment of the multi-sectoral development program, which was done by a government organization. It specifically noted that there was a significant impact of education and health by reducing deficits. So whatever infrastructure that program created, it ended up bringing more students to classrooms and providing better health care. And it included upgradation of facilities, which based on what they've listed out as in terms of lab equipment and computers would have required electricity. But the assessment also does not talk about how electricity ended up affecting this access in the impact assessment as well. So electricity, even while discussing specific things that run on electricity, it's not included in the impact assessment part of it as well. So there's another category that we've considered as basic policies. So they consider electricity a supply side requirement and provide directions on determinants of the quality of electricity supply. Basically, these kind of policies, they often allude to electricity as a requirement for regular operations, but they just stop short of connecting the availability of electricity to improvement in education, sanitation, health, hygiene, other indicators. If we look at the health sector, there's a program in Assam, the Chief Minister's Free Diagnostic Services Program. There's also a Kushal Mangal Karyakram in Rajasthan. Both of them, they require the facilities as an essential eligibility criteria. Now, if we look at the eligibility criteria, the onus sort of falls onto these health facilities to get access to electricity so that they can then access a particular scheme. So that ends up becoming an issue for the health facilities who are operating the health set instead of it becoming a easier access. Also, the stakeholder mentioned that healthcare workers from unelectrified centers ended up forcing to liaise with authorities to get these electricity connections, which is not their job description also, but that's what that ends up happening. This program also seeks to ensure the availability of minimum set of diagnostic services, but then again, doesn't mention how people can access those things. The immunization handbook also, which is specifically, there's a handbook for healthcare workers. It details the electricity requirement for ice-lined refrigerators and provides guidelines for how to optimally use those guidelines. But however, there's no discussion of what is going to be the source of electricity again. So that's a handbook, which essentially should include how you'll access electricity for your immunization chain. If you look at the state NHM budgets also, they include electricity under operating expenses, but they fail to discuss provision of electricity connections to health facilities that don't already have one. They also fail to indicate whether operating expenses include grid electricity or is it specifically for diesel generator use. We looked at Rajasthan's NHM budget, which indicates that funding will not be made available for new healthcare centers unless they follow the IPHS guidelines, which specifically mention ensuring that electricity facility is available. But again, when we speak to stakeholders, what they end up mentioning is that it's mostly an aspirational document. There's scarcity of resources and limited capacity in rural areas to operationalize IPHS guidelines. In education, we have one of the main programs is the EMRS schools. Again, they don't mention electricity. The construction, so we also ended up going to the expression of interest for construction of the school. And that talks about electricity supply. The main document doesn't, but that talks about electricity supply, installation, testing and commissioning, all of this, and for even diesel generators for external work. In Assam, there's a Gunotsav evaluation guideline, which basically are meant to evaluate whether schools have the infrastructure needed for a suitable teaching environment. One of the indicators for this evaluation is availability of electricity, the internal wiring and connection to a source. The guidelines, again, stop slightly short of measuring the reliability and related operational expenses. In Jharkhand, there's an interesting development. The Atal Tinkering Lab is there everywhere, but in Jharkhand especially, it's part of the Education Project Council, and it mandates that a school must have electricity connection to be eligible for ATL again. So what has happened is a lot of all the ATL schools are connected to electricity, but then there's an interesting issue which was noted by the stakeholder, which is that making electricity a prerequisite has a bit more of a perverse outcome where only some are then eligible, and you can't expand the program to many regions. More central and accessible locations ended up having, whereas the idea behind this program was that you include more rural areas into the program. One thing to note here is the draft national SSA, that's the Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, has the potential to be an integrative policy. Because if I'll just read it out exactly as it is, it says that development of holistic infrastructure is school infrastructure is a holistic exercise of developing the school building along with its indoor and outdoor spaces to promote universal access, retention, equity, and quality in education. So this does talk about electricity. This talks about how other infrastructure is necessary for creating an environment that ends up retaining more students in school and provides quality education. From the multi-sector point of view, we have Rajasthan's solar energy policy, which notes that government schools and hospitals can access incentives to deploy on-grid solar systems. Now it restricts the access to on-grid solar systems. So areas which do not have a grid access, again, they might not end up benefiting from this. On the development side, we have the MLA LADs, MP LADs, there's backward regions, grants, all of these, which specifically focus on digital education related infrastructure as well. And some of them also focus on energy efficiency. There are also some which allocate funds for building solar energy infrastructure in schools. So these schemes fund development of health sector as well and electricity as well, schools as well. So there's some connection that can happen. So as I mentioned, this is a basic category. So they do talk about these things, but not how they are related to each other. In the Northeast, because we are including Assam here, there's a Northeast Special Infrastructure Development Scheme, the aim of which is to improve rural infrastructure. It mentions improvement to electricity, but then does not specify whether access will be made to schools and health facilities. It may end up just being to the household level electrification. And finally, we have the integrative policies, which are mostly aspirational. They actively acknowledge the linkage between electricity and desired outcome, and they also mention institutional outcomes, which would be dependent on coordination mechanisms and coherence of different policies. The IPHS guidelines, as I mentioned earlier in the health, are the most few significant documents in the health sector, which is talks about the importance of electricity for functioning of operating rooms, for blood banks, for vaccinations, and they also set up minimum standards for providing healthcare. And all of these minimum standards include access to electricity. They also provide guidance on designing health facilities in ways that reduce the disaster risk as well. The guidelines basically provide a uniform standard that can be used to enhance health delivery across India. They allow flexibility, and they acknowledge that there's diverse priorities across regions, and they also talk about how electricity requirements may change depending on facility levels. There is also a requirement mentioned in terms of backup, generator backup, but it does talk about. So there's a lot of linkage between how the outcomes that they are looking for are affected by electricity access. Some of the new standard requirements also talk about solar power where feasible. And there's an interesting document from Jharkhand, which is the Convergence Scheme. It's titled like that, under the National Rural Health Mission. And it talks about the importance of interdepartmental coordination. The scheme basically acknowledges the interdependence of various sectors in achieving broader outcomes for the society, such as nutrition, literacy, water, sanitation, and general well-being. And so it talks about various different departments, and it integrates electricity into the discussion as well. On the education side, the only one that we were able to find that falls under this criteria is in Rajasthan, which is trying to improve digital literacy at Utkrisht schools by providing solar-based electricity. It ends up raising funds for the effort on its, it's called a Gyan Sankalp portal. The initiative is separate from the portal, but the idea is that, the need for electricity to achieve these outcomes is mentioned in the documentation as well. It sort of talks about physical discomfort that would go away if electricity is available in schools. It recognizes the challenges that public schools face in paying for electricity as a service, and includes a very clear policy instrument in form of a fund to address this gap. And if you look at multi-sectoral policies, there's quite a few policies on climate change, state climate action plans and disaster management plans, which talk about various departments together. But the Jharkhand one was interesting because it specifically mentioned how electricity access can improve adaptive capacity in the region, which is a very important point. And We did not see this in most of the other states as well. The state disaster management plans also, they end up describing the importance of, restoring electricity after disasters, and they talk about health sector. Assam's plan established a coordination mechanism between the disaster management authority and the electrification department, and they've also conducted risk assessments and contingency plans. Some of them support the education department to improve electricity in schools because they are used as shelters during disasters. So that's an interesting development that has happened as well. And as we all know, schools, a lot of schools were also served as quarantine centers during COVID-19. And most of them that were used as quarantine centers were electrified in Assam. So I'll just end with a few observations and recommendations that we'll be talking about. We've talked about in the paper. As I mentioned, we are talking it in terms of the analytical framework that I described earlier. So in terms of policy frameworks, although the households focus on, electrification policies is kind of welcome, obviously, but the future policies need to expand the definition to include electrification of health, education, and livelihood centers. Historically, India has adopted a supply-driven planning approach because its objective was to supply power to all. However, for many reasons, we've not been able to provide access to institutions. With the ongoing transformation of the sector, and especially the emergence of decentralized renewable energy, it is now possible to meet this undermet demand for electricity in these institutions. Another point that we'd like to make is the nodal authorities need to identify the linkages enabling service delivery and create the instruments to needed, to deliver these services. As I mentioned, the example of immunization handbook for health workers, if it is synchronized with an integrative document such as IPHS, we could end up reducing a lot of gaps, current gaps. We don't need to necessarily create new policies. There are already policies which can work together to bridge this gap that is existing. There are sectoral standards that are used by both of these education and health centers, and they need to sort of allow some form of flexibility also to provide, essentially reference how electricity and delivery of services can be better integrated. For some schemes, providing access to electricity is a prerequisite, as I mentioned earlier, for accessing benefits. Such requirements then puts an onus of electrification on individual facilities rather than on government departments. So policies and departments need to ensure that required infrastructure is actually available where you want a particular scheme to work. Otherwise, your scheme may be technically available all over India, but may not be implemented all over India. And sometimes individual policies may not be integrative, as I mentioned earlier. They may need to be applied alongside each other to achieve, sectoral outcomes. And I'll give an example here, the Assam solar policy. It operationalizes Assam's energy vision. So they are both separate documents. But one is talking about how, the solar policy details basically the incentive structures and mechanisms to bridge the reliable electricity gap in remote regions. Now, that ends up demonstrating how an action-oriented policy can complement an idea-based policy, which is the vision document. Harmonization with line departments and user agencies is also needed. In one state, according to a state-level health expert, the renewable energy department ended up solarizing a lot of health centers, but they did not do the assessment that was required to install these services. So post-implementation, what ended up happening is many of these systems are shut. The health centers are functioning, but the systems are shut. And in certain cases, the health centers have also shut down because they were going to open new centers close by. So a proper assessment also needs to happen when you're actually providing electricity to new areas. In schools, outcomes such as better attendance and reduced dropouts are very clearly linked to wash and electricity. But that connection is still missing in health. Education has very clearly demonstrated what is required for achieving these outcomes, and we need to mention those in health sector policies as well. In terms of information and tools, accessible and reliable data are very critical to inform, decision making. The way data sets are organized right now and made accessible also indicate the agency's intent on, how they want the data to influence the outcomes or how data can be used. When governments use only sector-specific, data sets which are housed under their departments to make decisions, it sort of ends up anyway incentivizing the attempts to integrate action. As we have Sir here, TADP's Champions of Change dashboard, we talk about that as well, which collects and tracks about 49 performance indicators across health and nutrition and basic infrastructure, all of this. And that's something that is a very good portal, how NITI Aayog is attempting to validate some of these data by working with non-government agencies as well. We have our own Energy Access Explorer, which will be released soon, which also talks about how demand-driven planning approaches need to prioritize electrification. Implementing agencies also need to focus on freedom and flexibility of financial instruments to manage, manage implementation by their departments. Processes that clarify allocation, the responsibility of who does what, especially part of the operationalizing policies that needs to happen. And decision makers should move away from the conventional methodology of monitoring physical progress and financial progress only. A more comprehensive systemic monitoring and evaluation framework is required for many of these the policies. And finally, lastly, I'll say that as integrative policies are useful, but they are also very insufficient to achieve intended outcomes. For policies to be really transformative, to make a difference, we need institutional structures, we need finance, we need information and coordination mechanisms in place. Then we can have policies implemented in an integrated fashion as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Namrata. I hope this gives everyone a good summary of the paper, and we look forward to your feedback. I would now like to request Mr. Rakesh Ranjan to deliver the keynote address. Mr. Ranjan is Mission Director of the Aspirational Districts Program, or TADP, which is currently being anchored in NITI Aayog. TADP aims at rapid transformation of identified backward districts in India. From 2009 to 2016, he has served in Planning Commission and was one of the officers who saw the transition of the Planning Commission to NITI Aayog. Originally an officer of the Indian Police Service, he has received the President's Police Medal for Meritorious Service in 2007 and President's Medal for Distinguished Service in 2016. Welcome, sir.
A very good morning to all of you. Good number of participants are senior to me professionally, so I speak with a sense of humility. First and foremost, thanks for inviting us, and thank you for presenting this paper. We were, in fact, when approached by the WRI, then I had a surprise by looking at the theme of the paper, because, I was surprised because I said, ye to ho gaya, iska kya karna hai? We have already done this, and I'm talking at the personal level, not at the NITI Aayog level. So my surprise is the diagnosis of a lot of problem here. Because, trust me, within the government, the idea was about 3 years back that India has done pretty well in electricity, and while we have done a wonderful job in taking the electricity to every village, the task remains of taking the electricity to every household, and that's why the Saubhagya was launched, and in a mission mode approach. And one of the hallmark of the last few years of governance is that, especially in some of the basic services, there exists a general tendency to launch things on a mission mode, and with a target date and all these things that has to be completed. And while in aspirational district program, one of the indicators that we picked up was the electricity to the household, and almost now about 1.5 years back, the Power Ministry's website keep on saying 100%, 100%, 100%. And since our program is based on delta ranking, where we give credit to a district to kind of make improvements, so it keeps on coming 0, 0, and 0. So the Power Ministry indeed told us that drop this indicator, we have done this. And there is a small catch there that pertains to that SECC houses which are enumerated, and not all houses. And we welcome every such survey which tells us that electricity has not reached this particular household. But that does not solve the problem that has been highlighted in this particular report. And there is a particular table here which I saw with great deal of trepidation and disappointment, and just hope that some of the data is dated, and because most of the district magistrate that we speak under aspirational district program, and a school with functional electricity was one of the indicators that we had in our program, and we always get around 90%, 95% figure from the district administration. In the government, the last, as we saw increasingly, the approach is that, especially in service delivery, can we saturate? I mean, that has been the approach. The Honorable Prime Minister has said on many occasions that, especially on the basic services, I mean, our approach should now be of saturation. Under aspirational district program, we attempted this. Done by the Ministry of Rural Development, Mr. Amarjit Sinha, when he was the secretary. So what he planned was Gram Swaraj Abhiyan. And in all the 112 aspirational districts, we picked up villages which have more than 1,000 plus population, and picked up 7 of these schemes of Government of India, which was important, which were important at that time: Jan Dhan, Atal Mission, Indradhanush, then Ujjwala scheme. There were 7 schemes: Pradhan Mantri Suraksha Yojana, Bima Yojana. There were 7 such schemes on immunization. And the idea was that can you work for 3 months and then saturate it in all 1,000 plus population village in India. And the data indeed showed that if the Indian bureaucracy with the state government can want to work, then they can, within 3 to 6 months, they can make a lot of change. Because that was what the data came from 112 district. And buoyed by this idea, slowly this is now getting into the government systems that, especially in some of the basic services, let us saturate. And soon we will be launching, and as aspirational district program is not a pilot. It's a hybrid between pilot and running a full-scale program, because the whole idea is that develop a platform where you can show and demonstrate that the action can result in achievement at ground. It's a purely practical program, and good number of people who came to us to contribute in this particular program, I have always asked them one question: here is the indicator, here are the districts. If you go, can improve something, then that's good for us, and that is the contribution that we want. So be that it may be, the whole concept of health and education, what WRI need not labor, and something which is, I don't know, I may be discordant, but it is very clear that electricity is important. Nothing can be done without it. So there is no need to kind of keep on this particular thing that it is important. What we need to do is not also in the policy document that whether somebody has recognized that there is required to have the electricity in the institutions through which the services are supposed to be delivered. What is required, the question that need to be asked is that, is there a scheme that provides money for coverage of the electricity at these institutions? Because we are hopelessly divided in a federal structure in which, we say that, okay, electricity hum laga denge, maintain karna aapka kaam hai. So the question that here is that, is there a scheme that has the sufficient fund that looks into this particular aspect, that whether all the institutions through which the Government of India saturation approach, where we want to kind of saturate, are they electrified and have the quality electrification, which means I think the durability of the electricity is available as and when we want. The second question that we need to ask is that, is there a mechanism through which those who run the district or those who run the kind of state or run the central government of India come to know that how many of their schools, sub-centers and all these things do not have electricity? Is there a system? Because what happens is that a school may have electricity, somebody put the electricity, but after that nobody has paid the bill, so it doesn't have the electricity in the first place. It has the connection but no electricity. Now, some of the figure that has been brought up, we will definitely reach back to the state government and say that, look, I mean, this is shocking. I mean, this is something which looks like there. And if you can look at the intent of the government, say, I'll just take an example of the Health and Wellness Center, which is one of the very important aspect of, taking the health services to the poor people. And the pandemic told us that there is a role of everybody, role of NGOs, role of everybody, but the whole set of modern day thinking that everything will be done by private sector is definitely very deficient, because there is a huge role of government in especially ensuring the health services. I mean, whether government is successfully able to rope in private sector, that's entirely, but that again is a very huge task for us. So what we realize is that in Health and Wellness Center, all of you must know this, and I'm sure that all of you may be knowing, that the vision is that it has a very, very good functional health unit for looking after the child and mother. It has a unit for yoga. It has a Jan Aushadhi Kendra for kind of cheap, generic medicine for everybody. And it kind of surveys and it screens the whole population, adult population, for 5 diseases: diabetes, hypertension, and 3 kinds of cancers. It doesn't require a doctor for all this thing. This can be done on technical basis. It is supposed to be linked digitally. All the health and wellness centers are supposed to be linked digitally, where when a doctor comes to know, or when a technician comes to know that here comes a man with a diabetes figure of 500 or something like that, or something which needs immediate help, or he happened to have the oral cancer, then how he or she can be digitally forwarded to the next level of hospital. Now, all this thing has, that is the vision. That's the vision of the government, and I'm sure that someday or other the health ministry is working on it. So, all of this have one very simple requirement. You happen to have electricity in the first place to have all the digital set that you're trying to do. When this pandemic hit us, Niti Aayog was flooded by a very smart set of people. They run what they call edutech, that they think that somehow by digital method we will be able to do what the schools cannot do, and that's why, and that is a welcome step, because as long as you're not able to open the school, then let there be something that can be kind of compensate in one way or another. But there, I think Ministry of School Education is giving a lot of money for a smart education, for a smart classroom, and that involves a TV screen, that involves some kind of setup, which is, Diksha has been noted here, which is a beautifully developed program. If you really look at, Anita Karwal has done a lot of mehnat on this, and it's a very, very beautifully curated program, which is there, which can give you the content. But the problem is, we went to Nandurbar district. They said, first and foremost thing, they said that ki program to bahut acha hai, bijli hi nahi hai school mein. So we offered something like solar or something, because there is so much of transmission charges there. It takes a lot of money to take the wire system to there. So I am sure that if you present whatever you have presented in the figure to Health Secretary and to my friend in Education Secretary and to us you have already presented, then it will make a lot of sense. Because I'm part of certain discussion where people have said, girls school mein toilet banana hai. So, I will not name any of them. This is a closed circuit, I can speak. Girls school mein toilet banana hai. So somebody, some wisecrack told us that we said that in 2016 that we have done 100%. So then said, okay, fine. But then isko karega kaun? Because it doesn't need neither technology, nor the budget need is very high. It's actually very, very less amount of money that is needed for that. Then finally said, okay, Finance Commission has given money for panchayat, so I think let us do it from the panchayat system. So what we need to work out, and I think the dream of WRA and dream of us in Niti Aayog should be that we must have a kind of a very non-glamorous scheme which tells us that is there electricity in every functional unit on the basis of which you want to ride your ambition and want to kind of saturate the services. Trust me, and what anybody who can reflect on these large programs of Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan or NHM and all this thing, what has been a game changer wherever they have achieved something is the efficiency of the grassroots worker. Wherever ASHA workers have worked properly, where the contract teacher have worked properly, wherever A&M workers have worked properly, it is, I mean, I see it every day in Aspiration District program, that our strongest and most critical link is the field level workers, and not what you kind of see look part of review and part of this thing at the higher level of government. So, WRI and NITI Aayog must come together, and we would. We have planned to work with the Aspiration District program, and we'll see to it that, especially on this large 112 district platform, there exists a method of monitoring this particular thing and finding a method of the money which is available either for providing the operational expenses of maintaining the electricity or for the connection, whether it is through the wire or through the solar system. I will also recommend that this study, this working paper should be presented personally to Mr. Rajesh Bhushan and to Anita Karwal, so that whatever they are thinking in terms of doing a lot of aggressive ground level kind of implementation of their program must be sustainable, because the basic link, if it is not there, then that's not going to work. And it actually doesn't cost much money. I mean, in fact, you can make your paper very much attractive by just kind of, comparing the money which is available for NHM and the money that is needed for this and money which is needed for IPSH standard. See, I mean, you've said that IPSH is a very important standard or something which is there. But we had a very back of envelope calculation that the money that is needed, the fund that is needed to build so much of infrastructure in terms of IPSH is very, very humongous. What you can say is that look, if India has to do something on the IPSH standard, you will require this kind of money. But if you really want to kind of maintain electricity in all the sub-PSC, then you will require this amount of money. This looks very, very nice. I mean, if you want to do this task, we'll do this task. But this is something it's like this, that, I mean, we are thinking of the sky and all the dream and all this thing, but I mean, somewhere one small wheel is missing. And that wheel is not very expensive to come, but I mean, we don't have any system of monitoring that wheel, or we don't have a direct system of funding that wheel. We leave it on that. I mean, I'm not surprised at all if the policy document will never talk about electricity, because first thing is that people like us assume that wo to hoga hi. I mean, if I am health, Additional Secretary of Health, I will say, Acha, let us launch the program. And yes, every sub-PSC, we are talking about Lakshya standard. I mean, we are talking about standards which are pretty decent. And we are talking about kind of populating our PSC and CSC with all these kind of labor room of Lakshya standard, which are pretty decent. And there somebody says, oh, I mean, sorry, I mean, this happened to be the electricity just not there. Then, I mean, we have a serious problem. So, thank you for this study. And we are very grateful that you have given us this study. I mean, take it to Health Secretary, take it to Education Secretary, tell them. But if you have the, a very crude calculation of what it takes India to kind of do this particular thing, and send it to all the chief ministers, send it to Jharkhand, Mr. Soren. He will be very happy to see that, I mean, with all his mehnat, I mean, this is something which is missing. And this much of operational cost is needed to maintain electricity in the schools and all this thing. So thank you very much, and thanks for calling us.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ranjan, for addressing this session. Your enlightening words will certainly encourage us to enhance our efforts even further. Before we start the panel, I would actually like to request Dr. O.P. Agarwal and Dr. Ranjan to take your seats in the front as we'll begin the panel session. For all the participants here, if you are live tweeting, The hashtags to be used are hashtag energy for development and hashtag clean energy. And please don't forget to tag us at WRI India. So let's move forward now to the panel discussion, and let me introduce our panelists for today and would like to request them to join us on the dais. Dr. Arun Panda would be moderating the panel. Dr. Panda is a senior fellow at WRI India. He brings with him 30 years of experience of working in the government, serving as Secretary, Ministry of MSME, and Additional Secretary, Ministry of Health in the Government of India. He has extensive experience in the health sector, having served as the Mission Director of the National Health Mission and Director General of the National AIDS Control Organization. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Kamal Gaur. Ms. Gaur is currently the Deputy Program Director of Education at Save the Children. She has 28 years of experience in education planning, management, and administration, ranging from primary education sector to the higher education sector. She has worked with international donors, private sector, academic institutions, and other grassroots organizations in multiple countries. Adding to her vast career, she has also contributed to the district primary education program and Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, to name a few. I would also request Mr. Abhishek Acharya to join us on stage. Mr. Acharya is an officer of the Indian Economic Service, serving the government of India for 13 years. At present, he's a director in the Climate Change Finance Unit in the Ministry of Finance. He has participated in the UNFCCC COP24 and COP25 as the finance negotiator for India. Before joining the Indian Economic Service, he has also served as Deputy Superintendent of Police in the state of West Bengal. He speaks 6 languages, including French, Spanish, and German. I would now like to invite Mr. K. Rahul Sharma on stage. Mr. Sharma is an Associate Fellow at the Center for Policy Research and a PhD candidate at the Brent School of Environmental Science and Management at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He works on questions of administrative reform, institutional design, and public sector capacity building with a sectoral focus on urban sustainability and natural resource management. Next, I would like to request Mr. John Rajesh to join us on stage. Mr. Rajesh is a program manager at the Catholic Health Association of India, or CHAI. CHAI is the largest not-for-profit healthcare provider in the country after the Government of India, with a network of over 3,500 healthcare institutions. Mr. John is responsible for a full range of solar project development and implementation activities. He supports raising finances, planning, and procurement for future energy projects in CHAI network health facilities. We also have 2 of our panelists who are joining us virtually today, and would request our virtual guests to switch on their cameras for the session. First, we have Ms. Chaya Pacholi, who's the Director of Center for Health Equity at Prayas. She's a health activist with a vast interest in different aspects of right to health. She has more than 15 years of experience of working closely with rural and tribal communities, especially in Rajasthan, on diverse areas of health and nutrition. She has expertise on community capacity building for healthcare planning and monitoring, health system strengthening, policy advocacy, reproductive health and rights, and access to medicines. Last, we have Ms. Uttara Narayan. Uttara, who is a co-author of the paper, is a manager for energy governance at WRI India. Her work involves the use of interdisciplinary approaches to address challenges at the intersection of environment, social justice, and development. She focuses on making instruments of decision-making such as data and policies more inclusive, and applying political economy analysis to understand stakeholder priorities for the energy access work in Jharkhand and the Energy Access Explorer platform. So over to you, Dr. Panda.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As has already been mentioned, we have an excellent panel today. We have 6 members, and we will start. As you already know, this paper is a part of WRI's Energy for Development initiative, which actually integrates clean energy into strategies and policies for improving development outcomes across 3 states. And this paper actually does talk about different policies in these 3 states and also the national level policies. And these 3 states are Assam, Jharkhand, and Rajasthan, especially in the areas of healthcare and education. I need not really talk about the role of electricity in service delivery system and improving outcomes in these sectors. Now, this paper does talk about the importance and the necessity of having integrated policies. And this has been actually talked about by the previous speakers. Now, we have around 40 to 45 minutes with us, and we have 6 panelists. So what we would do is, we would actually take 1 or 2 questions with each one of you. And then let's start with you, Ms. Kamal Gaud. And she has been actually, she has expertise in the areas of education. So I'll first start with you. Now, I would request you, now that you have already kind of, seen the paper and its findings, its recommendations. Now, what are your experiences in the field of education, and what steps and interventions are required to improve outcomes through the interventions of clean energy and electricity?
Thank you so much. First of all, congratulations and thank you. Because, somehow when we look at education, it always becomes very secondary to, any of the outcomes or impact which we are going to make in the lives of children or people. So it's always very secondary. We don't focus so much on education, though it's very right to talk about education in different narratives or speeches or political, platform. But when we actually come to to understand, the impact of a component like electricity in educational outcomes, I think it's people see it as a very far-fetched kind of a relation. So I think first of all, I would like to congratulate all of you. And also thank you for making education a little more important in terms of what could be those small things which can help us achieve student learning outcomes to the optimal level. So first with this. And my kind of experience, if we look at the data, general data, and I feel that education system per se has been able to collect school-related data in an extensive form. So you have UDICE, which is available. But when we look at the, all-weather schools, or fan in schools, or electricity available in, so it's not about availability as earlier speakers spoke about. It's just about having a switchboard. You don't know whether that functions or not. For me, when we talk about, and with all the kind of experience which I have, I see that, education needs to be safe and more resilient. And current pandemic has taught us that we need to be more resilient and safe. And to talk about that, electricity becomes a prime key driver. We, during last 2 years, we were expected to suddenly switch over to online mechanism, whereas we don't have ICT labs which are fully functional in school. We were suddenly asked to develop online program in 2 months or 3 months. For us, digitization was just, scanning of books and just displaying on the screens. So it was very difficult to, first of all, to convey that, digitalization is not just scanning your books and putting it up on the screen. So, and even if we had the material, even if we had the online material available on various platforms, but there was no electricity to run it. So access to electricity and internet became very critical. We said that, 24% of our people have access to online material, but when we talk about the internet connection and electricity, I think that was a challenge, right? devices was a challenge. So what my experience says is that we do talk about right to education, but when we look at the RTE Act and its compliance, it's not more than 11% to 13%, right? So definitely there's something which is not right. And second point is good to talk about education in public platform, but what makes it more effective? We don't need to talk about it. So, so these are two of my concerns. One is in terms of suggestion as well, which is for WRI, that UDICE does give data, school-related data, school-based data. If you can also give us little more inputs in terms of whether your data and the data which is available by UDICE, they talk to each other, or there is some reliability, consistency available in terms of electricity or any sort of energy. And also the second point which for your consideration is about the advocacy piece, how you are going to take it further. For me, I think that's going to be the most critical piece, and some of the points were already shared by representative from Niti Aayog, that how do you go to different ministry and take it forward. And you know, when I was looking at the presentation also, sometimes you know, we do feel that health becomes priority because it's like do and die kind of situation, right? Education, it's a very process-oriented work. It doesn't have those kind of impact and outcomes. So probably I think these are certain observations from my side, talking about that definitely it needs to be prioritized for education. It's safety in schools. And if some of you have visited those Anganwadis, even in Delhi, how safe is the electricity for those small children? Wires hanging out, right? And switchboards right at the point where any child can access them and put their fingers in. So I think something on going beyond, also looking at what the presenter talked about, whether there's a consistent supply of electricity, consistent supply of quality electricity, and ensure that Anganwadis or schools, when they budget, they have a provision, small provision at the school level and Anganwadi level, they need to budget for the maintenance piece. So I think these are my observations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, obviously, we are talking about reliable electricity and not just an electricity connection. And as has been very rightly pointed out, we are also talking about sustained access, not just, once you have access to the electricity and thereafter the institution is not able to pay the bills, then the whole, the entire connection is not there. Now, coming back to this, if we have to really provide this reliable electricity, and of course, for these institutions, like let it be health institution or educational institution, they need to have money. So financing actually becomes so very important, and it's a no-brainer that financing, and what are the, given the tight fiscal space, both for and the limited resources, as we all know, for the state governments who have this particular responsibility to really ensure that these institutions actually, have access to electricity and have sustained consistent access. Now, our second panelist, Mr. Abhishek Acharya, he is from the Ministry of Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance. So I would request you, Mr. Abhishek, if you could really tell us what could be the very, very innovative financing instruments or processes or procedures that the state governments and the Government of India and the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education and others can actually adopt, so that at least what has come out in the in this particular paper, we are able to really achieve that. I mean, the institutions in the health sector and the education sector, they would be able to achieve it within a specific timeline.
A very good afternoon, sir, and thank you, everyone. Uh, Coming from Ministry of Finance, Department of Economic Affairs, and the subject I specifically deal with is the climate change finance. Uh, as having come back from the COP26, I would like to say first of all that the basic tenets of inclusive development as enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goal number 7 and 13, which are the accessible energy and the climate action, they are very much interrelated and integrated. And finance forms a very important part of these particular goals that are the basic tenets of the Government of India's initiatives. Now, as we have already seen, our Honorable Prime Minister has announced during the World Leaders Summit of the 500 gigawatt non-fossil fossil fuel energy by 2030. So this is a very ambitious objective that we have undertaken, and finance is one of the most important issues for that. As we have seen that finance primarily towards our climate action and energy action has been from domestic resources, particularly from the budgetary resources. However, if you see from the angle of climate change, the financial imperative comes from the developed countries, which are actually the reason behind the climate change and the climate deteriorations. So both from domestic side and international side, the public finance resources holds extremely important role. And not only that, this domestic and international public finance has a very catalytic and leveraging role towards attracting private finance, because this greater level of financial requirement for our energy targets and our renewable targets have to be met with sustainable, credible financial flows. And we have already seen that there has been a call towards the developed countries to provide $1 trillion for the climate actions, which will also cut into the sustainable financial requirement for our climate actions. And as being part of the climate change, greater climate change family, I would like to say from the Paris Agreement, the Article 2 of Paris Agreement clearly says that sustainable development, poverty eradication, based on equity and the common but differentiated responsibilities is our primary goal. And in this regard, public finance as well as private finance through various innovative financial instruments would hold a very critical role for ensuring the financial flows to achieve the energy requirements and energy targets. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Abhishek. Our next panelist is going to be Mr. John Rajesh. He has very wide experience in the areas of health. So my next question is going to be on health. Which aspect of the working paper resonates most with you, which has been already presented and discussed? And what more can be done for better health outcomes? I mean, what actually came out from the paper that I found, that electricity has to be recognized as a very important component of the infrastructure, of the health infrastructure. I mean, that is something that has to be recognized, and of course, educational infrastructure. Now, from the paper that we all kind of, it was presented. From your experience, what do you think should be done more and differently, so that at least we can actually have better health outcomes, at the field level?
Thank you, and very good afternoon to everyone. So the policies in the working sheets are covered very well, wherein as per the Clinical Establishment Act, it says that electricity is must for all health centers. And with regard to the immunization to refrigerator, there should be an electricity with backup, and there is a hand guide, but it does not clearly suggest or gives us a clarification that what mode of electricity needs to be implemented. So that clarity needs to be done. And moreover, there are policies which is insisting on renewable energies, but the main thing, are we getting the proposed target or the outcome of it? No, it is because of the lack of monitoring and evaluation, wherein like that is more important to get the proposed outcome of the policies. And moreover, in terms of implementing the renewable energy in the health facilities, especially in the rural and the remote areas, there is a lack of awareness. Because still when we consider the northeast states like Assam and Jharkhand, still today we do have nearly of a minimum of 6 to 8 hours of power cut, where are many health centers and dispensaries are not operational, and the poor and vulnerable are forced to travel minimum of 100 or 200 kilometers to a better healthcare facility. So there should be a proper proper awareness on this. Also, the roadmap or the strategy to introduce this renewable energy or to bring awareness, it has the following factors, where it should consider clean cooking energy and access to electricity in all health facilities. And next is the drastically it should increase the public and private investment in electrifying the electricity, because the main issue in healthcare facilities introducing this renewable energy is the financial constraint. And now you can see the state or the district health authorities after this second wave of COVID pandemic have insisting the hospitals who has more than 100 beds to install oxygen plant. But there is a financial assistance to the hospitals from the government end, but it does not clearly specify that what mode of electricity should be done, because it requires a 24-bar electricity, and drastically the electricity bill also increases. And which having 3,500 more than 3,500 member institutions, we were able to convert our health facilities to 250 plus healthcare facilities to a renewable energy, which is just 7 to 8% of the total net member institutions. And based on this, post installation of this renewable energy or the solar installations in our health facilities, we have come across a drastic change, wherein on a monthly basis there were about 50% increase in the outpatient and 50% increase in the inpatient as well. And all these health facilities have saved 80% of the electricity bill per month. So which is really a good thing. And we were seeing the outcome of these health facilities. The other health facilities are showing interest for the installation, but then comes the financial constraint, wherein the lack of financial support, then we need to look for the foreign donors or anywhere. But now, even though across the globe, when we consider the largest consumer of energy is the healthcare industry, but still the healthcare industry, the electricity is being considered as a commercial one, and there are many subsidy schemes for the domestic usage, but why not for the electricity in the healthcare facility, which plays a vital role. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. John. Our next panelist is Ms. Uttara Narayan. She's actually the co-author of this particular paper, so my congratulations to you. If you can just, she's actually joining us, I think online. Can you, okay. Can I ask this question to you?
Sure, please go ahead.
Yeah, please. In the paper, actually, I came across some very bright examples from different parts of the world. For example, Uganda's Energy for Rural Transformation Initiative, and it does talk about Brazil's experiment. And so being a co-author of this particular paper, what do you think should be the next steps? Because I believe many speakers before us have also mentioned that unless and until there is a budgetary allocation, there is a budget provision, and there is a realization at the level at the highest level of the different national government and also the state governments, more importantly, things, unless there is a monitoring mechanism, they have to find out which are the health and wellness centers which actually requires good reliable electricity and things like that. So unless and until that is done, it will be very difficult to really achieve those goals. What are your thoughts? You being a co-author, you have actually gone through various, in these, at least in these 3 states. What are your personal recommendations that what should be done further at different levels so that this can be achieved?
So thanks a lot, Dr. Panda, and thanks to the panelists for their insights as well. And like you mentioned, I think we also need to look at the report interpret it in 2 ways. One, we're not evaluating it, but rather we're trying to describe an anatomy of the policy schemes that already exist, and how do we ensure that there is better service delivery eventually, right? And so there we've understood that there are certain characteristics that come through that we as stakeholders who are involved in various aspects of the design and implementation of these policies need to be aware of and incorporate that for better outcomes. And the second is also that it's intersectoral, but also across scales, as you and the panelists and Dr. Ranjan were also mentioning that there is also a scalar thing, and there are different types of capacities there. So there are 3, giving this background, there are sort of 3 immediate steps for us to reflect on. The first is around capacity, the second is around data, and the third, which I think everyone resonates with, which is one of the most influential, is around finance. So for the first, I think what we need to understand, and Mr. John also just mentioned it, is we need to figure out how to enhance capacity of the local service delivery personnel, be it in the health, education, or other related socioeconomic delivery departments, right? We need to build capacity of the departments as well as those who are conducting the on-ground implementation so that they are able to better understand what their electricity needs are. Now, if we truly want to take up a demand-driven approach, we must equip these stakeholders to effectively articulate their electricity needs. Now, what that means is it's not just in terms of how do you obtain a connection, but it's also going beyond that and equipping them with, the knowledge and mechanisms to manage periodic maintenance, bill payments, and so on, as and when it's applicable. This is very fundamental, but it's a significant starting point that we need to take forward. The second is that our public data governance and presentation must be more integrated. So the Champions of Change dashboard that NITI Aayog has for the TADP program is one such example that allows for multi-sectoral data to interact with each other for more insightful decision making. Now, unless we're able to visualize these data across levels and across sectors together, it's going to be very difficult to plan and take evidence-based actions. And again, here, the more granular the data, the better, because it's really the information should be something that aids on-ground decision making. And finally, and discussing on the component of finance, it is important to make financial mechanisms that are sufficiently flexible. Of course, the flexibility should also be supported by relevant accountability mechanisms, but being able to ensure that there is an intersectoral ability to use these resources, it makes it a more empowering tool for implementers on the ground. So these would be the 3 key takeaways for us to focus on.
Thank you for your reflections. Our next panelist is Ms. Chaya Pacholi. She's also, I believe, she won't be able to really join. Okay. In that case, like our next panelist is going to Mr. K. Rahul Sharma, who has been actually working in the area of policy research, and this is a very important area. And if we really talk about health equity or equity in education service, what kind of policy interventions, innovations should be done at not just at the government level, but also at the other levels. Like, for example, the private sector, there's a whole, non-government organizations, that sector. So I would like to really ask you, this particular question, what more is required for better health coherence and integration, because a lot of, like, there are private sector schools, there are schools, and there are health facilities which are being run by non-government organizations and all that. I believe what could be more, what should more be done, what should be done so that at least there is more coherence and better integration. And we also have more integrated policies, a role of private sector and NGOs vis-a-vis the government, and what more should be done at the policy space, both at the Government of India level and also at the state government level, because we all know we have been discussing about the wonderful initiative of Government of India regarding the aspirational districts, where it's being monitored, and every month it's being monitored. I believe because I was in the health ministry, and thereafter, like in the MSME ministry and otherwise also, we have been seeing there are very many well laid out parameters in which are being actually monitored. So what more should be done so that at least at this particular level, then there can be better outcomes in future. Mr. Rahul.
Thank you, Dr. Panda, and many congratulations to the team for bringing this report out. I was reading it yesterday, and it's super generative, so I have 2 pages of notes. I'm hoping that I will be able to get through them, but maybe since we don't have one speaker, I can use up that time. Just quickly, I worked in implementation and setting up these solar power plants for many years earlier, and now I'm donning this policy research hat. So I speak from both perspectives. So the research side of this is really interesting to me. I think this is a really great framework. I think that the points about how the onus of integration should not be on the facilities, the framework on indirect, basic, and integrative is very powerful. And so just kind of pushing that forward, I think one of the things I was thinking about is what one could do collectively to think through nuancing this framework further. There's work on integrative climate policy by people like Jeroen Kandel, and to the researchers, I can give you these names later, but where they talk about integration at different levels, right? The policy framing level, the policy subsystem level, policy goal level, and the policy instrument level, right? So I think one thing to do is to think about how this framework adapts to the structure of the Indian bureaucracy and government. At which level is which tool most appropriate to implement, and where can you get the most bang for the buck? And I'll give you some examples that might help think through this. The second point sort of relates to this integration issue, and I think that's what we are talking about here. I'll just give you a few examples of the work that I'm doing in Meghalaya right now with the government there, to at least give you 3 examples of different levels of integration strategies, right, or conversion strategies. So one, is sort of coming up, how do you actually get integration in government, right? One way that we're doing it now is to create sort of a very high-powered position in the bureaucracy in a department like the planning department that spans across many departments, right? So planning, expenditure are typically departments that span across and have influence on many other departments, right? So like the Office of the Development Commissioner in Odisha. Right? So coming up with that kind of a high-powered position is often very helpful for integration. We don't know if it'll work. With all things in government, it's hard to figure out because outcomes are so complex, but that's one idea. The second thing that we're doing is we're creating a new center of excellence on natural resource management. My work on convergence is broadly on natural resource management. This is a highly capacitated, research-oriented body that is focused on actually doing facilitation between departments. The point I want to make is that convergence is not going to happen by creating a body of secretaries or principal secretaries who meet once in a while, right? Convergence needs capacity, and thinking about what you create and how do you empower them, right? So we don't have facilitation skills in this country. We consider that to be management talk. It's not. It's very important. It's very important to be able to sit and get 6 very senior bureaucrats to agree with each other, right? And to say we're going to have a common mission that we put forward. So that's point number 2. And point number 3 is we are running a range of dialogues with ministers, right? And these are about trying to solve complex problems together, right? These are very high-level dialogues, but they do the work of my next point, which I think is perhaps the only thing that I found missing in this report, which is the politics of it. And I don't say that academically. It's very important. Political saleability of the idea, or the fact that politicians pick it up is super important for convergence, especially for convergence. The structure of our bureaucracy, and I essentially now study the bureaucracy and the people in the bureaucracy, I find them fascinating, it's very effectively structured to deliver programs in a particular way. Convergence is not this ideal, the comfort zone for the bureaucracy. I think it's been very cleverly designed to do certain things. But often, and a lot of the research supports this, that when you try to create convergence, often, even with these high-level panel of bureaucrats and things like that, it often doesn't work out. What you do need is political saleability to bring about that kind of consensus. This can be done in two ways. One is giving the ways it can be done is by giving politicians something to take home, right, as a message. The SDG is already a strong message, but I think here there is also the message of energy justice and energy equity, right? So far we've spoken about it in terms of access, but talking about it as people getting the developmental benefits of electricity, which is education, health, etc., is another way to start creating some sort of a normative desire for politicians to buy into this, right? And it also gives civil society something on which they can make demands. So just to kind of bring the politics in. The last point I want to make is a bit of self-reflection for us, right? As think tanks and as researchers, what role do we play in this process? Oftentimes it becomes quite technical. I think the role of facilitation, the role of just sitting with people in government, making them talk about complex problems is something that we want to think about as an active part of what we do. And the last point I want to make is a little bit of caution on overemphasizing convergence as the problem. I think this is useful to think through. It's one of many problems that are there in government. But for me also, and this is self-reflection for me, not about this report, oftentimes there's a trade-off between thinking about convergence mechanisms and enhancing the capacity of existing bodies that already are mandated to do convergence. To give you a quick example, this has come up a lot in NREGA, right? So NREGA, there's been a lot of conversation about how we need to create convergence between various asset programs, right? So sanitation, housing, NREGA. What that has done in some sense is undermined the role that the Gram Panchayat already has, right, to do this. Now, just something to pause and reflect on and to caution us that there are these existing institutions, we can build their capacities, they can do convergence. The risk with convergence is we take away their mandates, right? And then the decision about the shelf of works in NREGA happens at the state level or in some district office and not actually at the level at which it is supposed to happen. So just keeping in mind the principle of subsidiarity, that's how we've been designed as a state, I think is just important. And I'll stop there. Sorry, that was a bit longer than I had planned.
Thank you very much. Now I would request any of the panelists, if you would like to really make a second point or anything that which now you think after you have already made those reflections, if anyone wants to say anything, please go ahead.
Convergence has been a challenge across departments, across policies. It, like presenter talked about ICDS as a live example of how convergence has been a disaster, because right now we don't know where does preschool sit, right? It's a live example. We had new education policy. We have no idea where will preschool sit, whether in ICDS system or in school system. So yes, convergence has been a challenge. But here I would like to add, which you, Mr. Sharma, which you have said it very lightly, that there needs to be a platform for sure, right? Platform for sure, but not overemphasizing convergence. But yes, look for academia, other CSOs, bureaucracy, and government to understand what will help me, right? Because मेरे को क्या मिलेगा इससे? that kind of, I think, thoda masala chahiye hota hai ki what will I gain out of it. So everybody, so probably to take it further and to take it to the next level, we need to have that kind of understanding. And here, when I talked about advocacy as a piece, I think how to take it further is going to be very important. How do you advocate for it? With whom you advocate for it? You talked about strengthening the top side, whereas I'm talking about strengthening the demand side. For us, as Save the Children, an organization, a CSO, our children, when they have raised demand with various ministers or even local level politicians or bureaucrats, so raising demand with BEOs or raising demand with MPs, those children, when they start talking to these people, and what happens is definitely to some extent demands get met. I will give you a live example of KGBV, where it is slightly related example, where a girl, when they were in the residential school and there was no electricity in the common area. It's a safety issue. It's an issue that they can't do their homework, they can't study. So the simple thing which they did was, first there was something called grievance redressal mechanism. In school they put a slip saying that, okay, we don't have electricity, we do have a point, but we don't have tube light. That demand was put. And when it was opened in front of the school management committee member, principal, and children, okay, choti si demand hai, ho jayega. So finally, when a CSO platform came, what they did was they took this up with the school management committee and the local leader. And finally, I think within a day or so, there was a new tube light put. So we need to look at both sides of solution and how do you put it as part of your advocacy plan, because policy, identifying gaps, it's okay, it's important. Prioritizing it is important. But how do you take it to the next level? Probably that's going to be a challenge. Thank you.
Anyone? Anything? Okay. So thank you very, very much, our panelists. And obviously, as you must have heard, there are very, very very focused kind of reflections and recommendations which have come from each one of them. And I was just reminded of something quite interesting. And today being a very important day, I don't know, I mean, I didn't say this before, but today is Constitution Day. So, and in the preamble itself, it says, you know, socio-economic justice. I mean, all that is being discussed is to achieve that socio-economic justice, which our founding fathers and the entire nation actually, you know, actually wants to achieve and wants to achieve those goals, those very high laudable goals. And you know, this is the sector, for example, the health and education and nutrition, and you know, all these sectors that we actually talked about. A lot of things have been done. We all agree. If you look at, let's take the health sector. Before 2005, the kind of investment which was coming in the health sector, and when the National Rural Health Mission came in 2005, the kind of investment which has come to the health sector is humongous. I mean, there is a huge difference. Now we are talking about health and wellness centers, which is going to be really, really a huge bunch of bouquet of services to the people actually at the grassroots. Now look at the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan and the investment in the education sector. I remember when, like Dr. Agarwal said, you know, when I used to be in a district, in the district collector, that time we used to find out like which are the schools which do not have a good school building, which do not have a pakka building. And the investment, and since then have been like, you know, in the school buildings and all that. Now perhaps the time has come when we have to kind of, you know, look at the deficiencies in those school buildings, in those institutions, in those PHCs, as to like, you know, whether we have electricity. Just electricity connection is not enough. It has to be reliable electricity. So that, you know, that's the kind of thing. Now, we are going to a different paradigm now. So there has been a paradigm shift, and we have to really look at that, and we have to find out, you know, how there can be budget, and how at the highest level there can be not just integration, not just convergence, there has to be a conscious decision to actually allocate funds. Because unless and until you allocate funds, if you just tell the school headmaster or you tell the PHC, the doctor who is in charge of PHC, that you get, we don't know how to do that, you get your institution electrified, or, I mean, if we say that, then we are not going to really achieve anything. The people at the helm of affairs have to realize that this is our job, at not just the government of India, at the state governments. And what Mr. Rahul said, very interestingly, that the planning department perhaps, which kind of there is an overarching coordination with all the different departments, if they can actually take it up. For example, they can find out which are the schools, which are the primary health centers, sub-health centers, which actually lack these facilities, and can identify the requirement, the fund requirement, not just the one-time fund, the CAPEX and the OPEX and all that, and keep people accountable that, okay, this has to be done, this is the timeline, this has to be done. And perhaps what, Madam, you just said, there's a huge need of advocacy by WRI and advocacy from the highest level like Niti Aayog, so that at least every ministry, they do it. And once it starts getting done through aspirational districts, which actually require, there's a crying need for these kind of interventions in those aspirational districts, I think things will move forward. Then we can really think that we are really moving pretty fast towards achieving those socio-economic justice and those laudable goals. Thank you very, very much. And I actually congratulate all the authors of this paper. I congratulate WRI. And also I would request that we should not just stop here. We should take it forward with all the government departments, not at the Government of India, but also at the state governments, and also non-government organizations and private sector and all that, so that we all can come together and we can achieve the goals that we have set for ourselves. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Wonderful summary at the end there. Thank you so much, Dr. Panda, for moderating, and to our wonderful panelists for this very insightful discussion. The recorded video for the day will be uploaded on the WRI website, wri-india.org. And if you have any queries, please reach out to us at indiaenergyteam@wri.org. For the closing remarks, I would now like to invite Ms. Harsha Meenawat on stage. Harsha is the Senior Program Manager for the Energy Program at WRI India, where she works on policy research and analysis for WRI's energy access and clean energy transition work in India.
Thank you, Lanvin. And thank you very much, Dr. Panda, for moderating this panel, and thanks to the panelists for sharing your ideas and thoughts on the issues of electricity linkages for development outcomes, the capacity needs, and the limits of convergence, and the policy advocacy that's needed for it. I do want to summarize a little bit of what was discussed in this panel discussion, and thank you, panelists, for sharing your thoughts, specifically pointing out the need for consistent and reliable electricity for schools and health centers and Anganwadi specifically. The facilities that are needed, and the ability to actually maintain these supplies and to continue to use them reliably for those development outcomes. Of course, the very important point that was raised here, which was that public finance obviously has the ability to leverage private finance, which is needed for the hour, which is the need of the hour to bring about these investments in not only things that will eventually give us a return on investment, but also for things that we don't really look at. We look at only as social loads for that matter. So another point that was very important, and it was raised, was that we need clarity on how to integrate clean energy into health sector or education sector facilities, and the fact that there is a lack of awareness right now, and we hope that research such as this will help in bridging that gap and increase the adoption of these solutions that are becoming more and more economical, as we have seen in the last few years. The experiences from the ground of adopting these solutions and of seeing the benefits of electricity and clean energy solutions in facilities. We hope that those sorts of experiences and sharing those experiences will also spur more action and more interest from the various kinds of stakeholders that need to be taking steps on this. Of course, enhancing capacity of local entities, of agencies, different kinds of agencies in different sectors, and then the fact that they need to participate in articulating their own needs and not just waiting for some energy sector stakeholders to define that, okay, you know what, let's just set up a transformer here, set up a transformer there, but the fact that they need to say that, no, we have these issues in reliability of electricity, we don't get electricity for so many hours. So the advocacy not only needs to come from this group of, let's say, the NGOs, but also needs to come from the health and the education sector and the ones who are working and operating in these facilities. Of course, one part of it which probably we can help a little bit is by using public data that's already available and to put it in a palatable form and to explain to various stakeholders that there is a need to integrate different kinds of data sets for different kinds of decision making for taking this forward. And the very important repetition of the point that we need flexible financing mechanisms so that there is intersectoral financing available for these intersectoral resource issues. So different kinds of solutions for different kinds of problems. And finally, coming back to the discussion that we ended with, that we need to create points of convergence, and we need to capacitate these points of convergence through research, through evidence-based evidence which can help in policy making, and the fact that we do need a high-level dialogue. It's not just, it needs to be a dialogue at multiple levels, but the vision will obviously come from the high level, and that is where we can take the ideology of the SDGs, the ideology around energy justice and equity as the fulcrum of the vision that needs to come out for this sort of integration. Of course, there are trade-offs between convergence and existing institutions, but we still need capacity development for all of this convergence to come about. Many thanks to actually Dr. Ranjan, Mr. Ranjan, who gave us a direction, at least in the 2 points, at least for our work specifically, that we need to have this very specific calculation of the funds required to do all of this in the education sector as well as in the health sector. And then, of course, additionally, what would be the operational cost to sustain it? Because that, of course, will generally comes as an afterthought, but it needs to be thought along with the idea of improving infrastructure and improving services. So with this, we come to a close of the event. The discussion does not end here. I hope this only spurs more thinking and sharing of ideas amongst all the people present here and of all the other stakeholders whom we all can reach out to now and share this idea. And we need to be working to not only recognize that electricity is an important input in development outcomes, but the direction that we already have now, based on this research and based on the comments made here, we need to continue this conversation outside this room. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us today for this session, and I invite all of you to please join us for lunch outside. The session can come to a close. Thank you.